Welcome to Against the Tide, the podcast where extraordinary social change makers share their stories and their wisdom. Against the Tide is a celebration of courageous women who create lasting impact by daring to forge their own path. We'll dive deep into powerful themes such as the complexity of identity and how it influences the choices we make, embracing change even when it feels uncomfortable, and how breaking free from labels can unlock your true potential. Join me, Jo Metcalf, to hear stories of incredible women who, by swimming against the tide, prove that extraordinary things can happen. This episode features Dr. Sarah Hughes, CEO of Mind. Welcome to what I know will be an inspiring episode of Against the Tide with Sarah Hughes, CEO of Mind. Sarah, your leadership journey is extraordinary. From your first role in local Mind at 18 to CEO of what is the UK's largest mental health charity. You've written and spoken so powerfully about being a working class woman in leadership, about authenticity and about your commitment to feminist leadership. I can't wait to dig into all of that with you today. Let's get started with your early life and how it shaped your path within mental health. You've described mental health as your life's work. Tell us about your early experiences and what drew you to this field.
Thank you so much. And it's really interesting when you hear somebody speak about you. It makes me think, oh gosh, I have done quite a lot, but also, oh my God, I'm quite old. But moving on. Look, so I was born in 1975 in North London and to wonderful parents. My dad was Glaswegian, my mum is Irish. My dad actually is of mixed heritage. And look, I was born into poverty, right, in North London. And that was a tricky experience, I guess, mostly for my parents. I can't really remember it, right? So, all I know is that I was deeply loved by my parents and by my wider family. My dad, he worked with the local housing cooperative. And so in terms of activism, he was a real community leader, community organiser. My mum was a home help. So I was really brought up with that sense of community, that sense of doing something for your neighbour, holding compassion and empathy for people up and down the street and around the corner. And I think the main thing is that when you come from an immigrant family, so grandparents came to England in the 50s and my grandmother came from South Africa as a black woman to Glasgow in the 40s. When you're the product of people who've had that experience, you are absolutely touched by it. It kind of filters into your bloodstream. So their experience of isolation, of exclusion, that was part of our family law. So alongside my parents being, community people, I also had this kind of deep sense of social justice that was kind of part of just the way we spoke as a family. We knew that we were outsiders and we knew that we often had to gather with folk that were like us to feel part of something. And so, other marginalised communities or racialised groups, that they were the people that I grew up with. I didn't really know English people until I went to university. Wow. And people find that funny because I'm a North Londoner. But that's the truth. My community was Irish, West Indian, Pakistani, African. And I went to Catholic schools. So again, very few English people. And so all of those experiences have formed who I am and my commitment to social justice. And of course, particularly in relation to mental health, because, I have, family members, people that I have loved and still love, who've experienced terrible trauma, mental health challenges, addiction, homelessness. And, my parents just always made sure that we held those people with love and loyalty and solidarity. And certainly my dad had terrible mental health challenges at various points in his life. So all of that conspired to make me who I am.
Yeah, an amazing and journey that you've had, and you've had your own struggles with
Yes.
mental health too, haven't you?
Mm.
Would you be comfortable sharing anything about
Yeah.
that experience as well?
Yeah, so I've had a number of different periods in my life, and I look back and I now know why. So I was diagnosed with ADHD quite late on in life, so just kind of before I was 40 and after I'd had both of my children. And oh gosh, I look back now and all of the mental health challenges I've had come back to the fact that I was undiagnosed. So the first, growing up, my parents used to always call me the girl in the bubble because people look at me now and I can talk a lot and I'm quite loud in many respects, but actually the natural me is quite shy and introvert. And as a child, I was very quiet, very into my own thoughts and the girl in the bubble, the girl in the attic, that was my kind of nickname. And when I got to my teenage years, I really struggled. So we had lots of triggers in the family. So my dad got ill, my grandmother was ill, there were lots of very difficult things going on. And that triggered a very serious period of mental illness. And that was the first time I tried to take my own life. And, certainly getting your stomach pumped at 16 isn't the greatest experience. And whilst I know now that was very much because I couldn't order my thoughts and nobody could help me, I think that's why, diagnosing, whatever people's experiences is so important because it helps you make sense. Then I go through my life and I have various different periods of illness. And so the next time was probably in my late 20s, early 30s, when I experienced just kind of managed anxiety and I just couldn't really deal with it or understand it. I experienced panic attacks. I remember I wrote about it in my blog, actually, getting on a train to go to work. I was managing mental health services in Holloway Prison. And I got on the train and I went 2 stops and then I had to phone my dad and say, can you come and pick me up? I just can't go any further. And then I spent 2 weeks on their sofa and allowed them to, look after me. And I remember at the time, and this is the kind of beautiful circle, really, I watched Trisha every day, right? And she's now a wonderful friend of mine, and she was also part of my healing journey from those kind of 2 weeks on the sofa being loved by my parents. And then the third time that I've had a very difficult experience with my own mental health was when my first daughter was born, and she has a very rare metabolic condition. And so when she was born, she had a metabolic crisis. Now, interestingly enough, I had a wonderful pregnancy. I mean, you can imagine me, Jo, can't you? I felt like I was the queen. Look, I am creating a human being. Like I wandered around like an Amazonian princess. So I had a lovely time. But towards the end of my pregnancy, I started to get a bit wobbly because I had, sadly, when I was a child, had watched my mum have a stillbirth of my beautiful sister. So I remember that vividly, and I was having a girl and it was all very triggering and I was starting to get anxious. Then I had my daughter, had a very long birth, 50 hours, no pain relief. A joy of a joy. I mean, I love giving birth. I'd give birth right now if I could. I
Hopefully
won't,
not.
but look, I'm too old now. But anyway, the fact is that I had a lovely time, and then so I was a little bit vulnerable. Just going back a bit, so I had spoken to my midwife and said, I'm having these terrible anxiety dreams that I'm going to lose my baby, like my mum did, and she said, look, don't worry, we'll refer you to the perinatal mental health team. So I'd already had a referral into them. And then my daughter was born, and at 2 days old, she had a metabolic crisis. And for a 2-day-old baby, that is usually life-threatening. It's one of those times when you take your baby into a hospital and they look at the baby and they basically smash an alarm and run off with your child and leave you there. And it was the most traumatic experience of my life. Billy survived, obviously, and it's whilst it's very rare for babies of her condition to survive at that point, it was an amazing female doctor that saved her life, was on duty that day and knew what to do, and an amazing health team. But the reality is that I then became really ill because the nature of my daughter's condition meant that if she got sick, she would have to go into hospital to be put on an IV. We had to feed her every 2 hours during the night. I became very isolated. I didn't want anyone to bring germs into the house, so I wouldn't leave the house. And again, I've written about this, but the defining moment was when I remember sitting next to my daughter's cot and looking in and going, actually, she might be better off without me. And thankfully, because my mum was coming over every day because she knew I was ill, she said to me in my mum's like North London twang, listen, doll, I think you need some help. And that's the moment I got some help.
Thank you for sharing all that. I knew some bits of that.
Yeah.
So, and how has the diagnosis of ADHD impacted on your mental health and well-being now?
It's changed things completely. It's given me clarity in ways that I would never have. You know, I mean, I have all my life thought that there have been fundamental things wrong with me. So things like this constant voice that I have, you know, this constant narrative. So I have a internal monologue every day, every hour of every day that's sort of talking to me. And it's not the same as hearing voices because that is a different experience. That I live with object permanence. So if you're not in front of me, I don't think of you. And that's terrible for people you love and for people who love you. And, you know, I've lost friendships and, you know, because I've found it difficult to hold on to those, you know, just everyday things. And friends and family and my husband particularly, you know, would laugh and say, you know, you need a carer. I'm like, yes, I do. I do need a carer. And that's because, you know, just organising things or getting from one place to another is a challenge. So now I know what it is and that it isn't just a character flaw or that I'm just rubbish. It's made a massive difference. And so I now feel able to put in the tools that I need to put in that help me navigate all the things that I felt bad about. And whilst they still cause huge problems in my life, you know, I am able to manage generally. There are moments when it's difficult, and those moments I have to seek help for sure.
And we'll come on to sort of that's help seeking. I think that's really important. But how has your working class background shaped your career opportunities and leadership style?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you know, it's really funny, right? Because being a woman hasn't actually always been the thing that's been the most challenging in my leadership journey. Being working class has. So the intersectionality of both, of course, comes together and again creates a particular dynamic. But you know, the reality is that being working class has been the thing. And it comes out in all sorts of ways. So for a long time, people will say things to me like, God, you're so articulate, which is code for, oh, that's a surprise. Or, you know, I speak with a very strong North London accent. So often I find myself masking it because I'll be with somebody and I think, oh, maybe I need to speak a little bit properly. Or, you know, the way I look, all of these things. And I don't have those, you know, connections. I didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. I, you know, don't have that kind of network that you're coming from. I don't really know I still don't know how to live a middle class life, even though I accept now that I'm middle class. I look at my kids who are the first children, gosh, in my family's history, pretty much, that are not born into poverty. And yet I look at them and I think, oh yeah, I can see why they're middle class, but I could never see that in me, right? And so it's still very much part of my identity. And the way it affects my leadership is that I think it gives me insight that I probably wouldn't ordinarily have. You know, my lived experience still very much dominates everything that I think of and the way I view the world. And I don't see a them and us in terms of the people that we're trying to support as an organisation. And I really remember what it's like to live in poverty. And that burns, and that burns still very strongly.
I was reading something about class, whatever class you're born into stays with you your
Yeah.
whole life. And definitely I can feel that, being from similar backgrounds in that sense. So it's fascinating,
It
isn't
is
it, really?
fascinating,
Yeah,
and just
yeah,
how it shows up in the way people think and talk to you, or
yeah.
you know, I know that I haven't had an automatic pass. That the relationships that I've got now, the network that I've got now, I know that I've made that happen, that it was not given to me. So there is a huge pride in that. But there were tears along the way when I've had to either fight hard, too hard, or I've been rejected, and I have been rejected at different times.
Yeah, yeah. And you've spoken about the privilege of authenticity. What does that mean to you personally?
Yeah. So look, we are, as women, are told all the time, you know, you'll do better, just be authentic, be yourself. And Polly Neat, one of my most favourite people, she has this great saying, know yourself, be yourself. And I think that's right, because you can only be yourself really if you know what the implications of that is. So, for instance, it's okay to say to someone like me now, be yourself, but that's because I'm 50, I'm a chief exec of a national charity, I'm quite well experienced and well versed. I can take risks now. I can take risks with how I show up. I can wear trainers to a posh dinner if I want to. The reality is, if you are a young woman or a younger woman who is working class, or a black or brown woman, those privileges aren't afforded to you. And so being yourself comes with a real risk that you won't be accepted. And so it's okay to say, be yourself. But also you have to know that there are consequences to being yourself.
And what would you say to younger people in those situations where they're having to adapt themselves, or feeling like they're masking things that you've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked hard at resisting masking. You know, even down to things that I've worn. I remember having a furious argument with the governor number one of Holloway Prison when he was saying, you know, because I was a senior manager, you know, why can you wear a suit or at least proper clothes as I'm walking around in leggings and a tie-dye, you know, jumper? You know, I really kind of pushed the boundaries, and I've resisted it, but I think that there were consequences to that. So what I would say to younger people is, understand the environment and context you're in, push the boundaries, but think of the consequences and make sure that you're prepared for them. So, you know, if it's the way you dress, if it's the way you talk, if it's the way, you know, I don't know, your family background, don't carry the shame of that, but equally think it through. And also push the boundaries where you can. And it's incremental, you know, it might take time, and, you know, it may take mistakes too.
I should have introduced you as Dr.
Yes.
Sarah. You've done a PhD on women in leadership, and you're a trustee of Global Leadership Exchange. What have you learned about gender and leadership?
Well, look, I think that gender and leadership is a really complicated space that we still don't fully appreciate. And we get the loads of people saying, look, you know, it's not an issue now. We've got loads of female leaders. We've had female prime ministers. We've had female blah. I mean, yes, of course, we've got representation. But also we have consistent and persistent and enduring, profoundly provocative undermining of those leaders and sabotage on the regular, right? So it doesn't, to me, there's progress, but progress for who and what and how. And it's so easily unwound. If we look at where we are today, there are less female CEOs in the corporate world than there has been for generations. And the rollback, the reason for that is manifold. Some of it is because of that persistent sabotage that hasn't gone away. Some of it is because the demands on women in terms of emotional and physical labour haven't subsided, and the environments in which we live have become so much more challenging that managing all those competing priorities is virtually impossible unless you have a heavy heft of support behind you. And I think that there is also something for me now, which is I have spoken to so many leaders of charities who are just saying, do you know what, I'm done. And I'm done because it is constantly never enough. And that burden is carried heavily by us all and still. And the double bind is really wicked as well, isn't it? You know, I've been talking about the likability trap, which is women in leadership. You know, if you're too nice, you're weak. If you're tough, you're cold. If you are not visible, you're in the kitchen. You know, I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And I find it tiresome often having to navigate all of those projections, but I'm very aware that they exist, and that it's more likely that, for instance, if we're going through, you know, complicated change programs, that the projections onto female leaders are quite different to that of male leaders, and the evidence supporting that is very strong.
Interesting. This next question links into that as well. You said that women often experience resilience as survival, while men describe it as thriving. Can you tell us more about what that means for women in leadership?
So during my research, it was really, really striking that when I was talking to women leaders, they would describe being resilient as literally holding on by their fingernails, that they saw being resilient as literally just coming back day after day, taking the hits, and still being there. And conversations I had with male colleagues were that resilience was also always about their self-development, that they were succeeding, that they were seeing impact. It was so stark. None of the men that I spoke to used the same words as the women that I spoke to.
Wow.
And so there is something about the notion of resilience that is that the framework in the very off is wrong, because systemically you can't compare the experience of men and women in terms of exclusion, discrimination, etc. and so on. So therefore we're not starting from the same playing field.
No. Why do you think that is?
I think it literally comes down to kind of institutional misogyny and, you know, gender stereotyping and all of that stuff that we want to move on from, but we're not moving on from it. And what we're seeing now is that rise of, you know, fascinatingly, things are being said out loud now on public forums about women that wouldn't have been said out loud in public forums 5 years ago. The increase in social media and obviously the toxic male leaders that we've got globally, that all conspires to the sort of, you know, the narrative about women is still one of weakness. You're subject to our control, and that might sound quite extreme, but I mean, you be a woman at the moment, for instance, in the US, and you find yourself with an unplanned pregnancy. That is wild, right?
Yeah, wild.
The battle you might have to fight for that.
Yeah, in the 21st century.
It's beyond comprehension.
Yeah. Can Can you tell me what a feminist model of leadership is?
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to be really clear about is that a feminist model of leadership isn't just all about women. And I often get challenged by men who, I can't remember what's the word for the opposite of misogyny. Is it misandry or something? When women are challenging men and criticizing men. So it's not about just women. It's about inclusion. It's about the belief that if we can make it right for women and black and brown communities, racialized, marginalized folk, disabled, colleagues, etc., members of our communities, that we will make it right for everybody, which includes the most powerful of all, which is still white men. And that I know is a key area of debate right now. The fact is that that's still the kind of version of things that everything else is based on. So I feel really strongly that to navigate all of that, feminist leadership is about inclusion. It's about honesty, bravery. It's about making sure that you are thinking from the margins inwards, that you do look after yourself and others, that you do make difficult decisions, but that you're grounded in equity, compassion and empathy. That you are adult and that you are mature. And so much of organisational life, I think, can sometimes fall into a trap of, kind of playground discussion or, parent-child, and feminist leadership actively resists that.
And why is it needed?
Because I think that we need to create environments that are inclusive. So that for me is number one, being able to bring everybody to the table. It's not just about representation, but it is really about diversity of thought. And, it's everything right about that way of thinking is important to me. And it's needed in organisations because I still think that we are dominated by traditional models of leadership. I think we're still dominated by structures and ways of working that are no longer suitable for, the position that we're in terms of hybrid working and generational differences and all of those sorts of things. And it's my view that that feminist leadership will give us the best chance at doing all of that, whilst also recognising that we still live in a capitalist environment. We still have hierarchy and leadership is still required. So those two truths can be held together at the same time.
And what does feminism mean to you?
So it means so many things, but it essentially means that, I could go very deep here, but of course I see women as divine. But we could do a whole podcast on that. So I believe that if we look back on civilizations of the past, we see women as leaders, being able to manage all of these, bringing people to the table, but also doing that with love and inclusion and clarity. And I believe that's what feminism is, that feminism is almost beyond gender, that it recognises marginalisation and absolutely doesn't accept it. And I think that when you practice as a feminist leader, you're all the time testing the boundaries of traditional ways of doing things and challenging yourself to think about why you're doing what you're doing. And that reflexive practice is fundamental to it.
Fantastic. With that in mind, what needs to shift in organisations and society to allow that feminist leadership to flourish?
So one of the things that I recognise very much from my own experience is that you have to be clear that that's the system of leadership that you're operating in. So very quickly, certainly in my last two jobs, this one and my last job, that I'm really clear from the outset, I'm a feminist leader and this is the kind of things that are important to me. And so I very much was clear about that at the beginning, and therefore people could understand that my priorities are around equity and justice, that I am about truth telling, that I don't believe in kind of radical candor or radical transparency, but I do believe in candor and transparency. So, you know, all of those sorts of things, being really clear about that. I think if you're a chief exec practicing feminist leadership, you have to have a conversation with your board, you know, about how that shows up. And I certainly know that my board are incredibly supportive of me and my leadership style. But I also know that they recognise that there is some risk with that, because I will talk about things that are not necessarily within the mental health wheelhouse. And so I think you've got to be able to have that conversation. And then I think the other thing, and the thing that I talk the most about, is peer support. If you are going to be a feminist leader, gather other feminist leaders around you. And I am part of extraordinary female leader networks. We have WhatsApp groups, we have all sorts of other things. I've got friends, I've got you and loads of other people across the sector that I've developed relationships with, that I know if I phoned you tomorrow, we could have a conversation and you would be open arms. And that peer support and those relationships are probably the things that I prioritise the most in terms of feminist leadership and the way in which that happens.
Brilliant. One thing I really admire about you is that bravery to speak out. Where does that come from?
I think there's right. I think it's an ADHD thing, right? So people with ADHD and autism and that sort of my kids, and you know, we call it the TISMs, that sort of area. There is a kind of link to social justice. So fundamentally, you're very alive to, because you can see patterns, you can see nuance, etc. So it comes from that. I come from a Celtic family, and we were called the Fighting Hugheses, partly because we would fight and defend anything. My dad would defend people on the street. He would, you know, I mean, all sorts of things. So very, very strongly, you know, clearly people who would step up. And then I think as I've got, and my dad had this really interesting principle: don't ever let anybody tell you about yourself. And therefore, I know that I have to have insight. And so I'm never going to let anybody put me down before I'm going to put myself down. I have enough insight to know what my blind spots are. So I'm brave because of that, because I know that people are going to think, oh, God, here she goes again. Or, you know, so that helps my bravery. And then I think that where I've got to, my class definitely, you know, because I think working class people generally say it how it is, and we don't, well, I'll speak for my working class people, we don't have a very sophisticated filter, and it does get me into trouble. I mean, it absolutely does. So again, there are consequences to it, but I've learned now that if you are consistent, people accept it and expect it. And so now if I'm in a room and I don't say something outrageous, people will say to me afterwards, "Are you all right?" And so in a way, now it's become part of my, I don't like using this word, but brand. And again, that gives me permission to act and say things that sometimes are a bit tricky.
What advice would you give to women listening who feel out of place in leadership because of their background or difference?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're not out of place. The system is out of whack, right? So we need to be really clear about that. But what I would say is the first thing I would do as a female leader is go and find your crew. You absolutely need a crew. You have to do that first. So find your people, and the people that you can send a WhatsApp to on a Friday, basically saying, you know, WTF, that was a hard week. Or I think that you need to be able to recognise, as well as having your peers and your crew, I think you need to be prepared for the onslaught. I want to say that it's, you know, really great and easy, and you know, it's straightforward, but it really isn't straightforward to be a female leader. And I think that you have to think that through, think it through about how you will handle discrimination or, you know, being set aside. Think about how you will handle, you know, someone saying something slightly weird to you, you know, scenario, you know, plan those in your mind, seek advice, and do some reading and thinking and research on it. Because I think one of the things that was really important for me and my leadership early on was that I did some studying around the unconscious, systemic and psychological dynamics of leadership. And so some of the things that I was experiencing, I was able to go, oh, it's about the work, or it's about the organisation, or it's about the system. And therefore it helped me manage that sense of, I don't understand, or I'm just feeling rubbish about this. So I think all of those things don't stop developing your knowledge of leadership, because it changes. And being a leader today is very different to how it was pre-pandemic. And so because of that, keep on top of it. You know, don't just assume that your leadership style stays the same, because it doesn't. It will evolve.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. Finally, on a more light-hearted note, I read a blog about having tweakments and the
Yes.
impossible beauty standards women are held
Yeah.
up against. Have you got any message for our listeners who might be grappling with that apparent contradiction between feminism and fillers?
Oh yeah, gosh, I love this. I love this question. Partly because I've always wanted secretly to be a beauty influencer. So
Oh,
I'm just saying, this is
there you
I'm
go.
like manifesting this into the world. But the fact is that I have a big thing about the way I look, and partly because I have been in my life nearly 25 stone. So a very big woman, and being, you know, a big woman, you know, is absolutely hugely challenging. Fat phobia is very real, and the discrimination you experience is quite extraordinary. So I would say that has also been quite a significant part of my life. Over the years, I have, you know, lost weight for health reasons, and that's been incredibly important. But it has meant, though, that I've had a lot of commentary about the way I look. You know, people always comment on, you know, the fact that I've either lost weight or, you know, etc. So the way I look isn't just in my own head. But I also come from beautiful women, and, you know, my grandmothers, my mother, and I look at them and I always, you know, aspired to be them. My grandmother, my South African grandmother, for instance, I see my cheekbones, I see my hands on my mum's hands. And all of those things are really important, you know, that kind of heritage. But as a feminist, I also accept that whilst I'd love to just let it all go, and I did stop dyeing my hair, but, you know, I also want to be pretty, and I want to wear pretty things. And all of those things, you know, they can be used out there. You will often find sometimes women say, well, if you're a feminist, why are you so concerned with how you look? So it can be used as a kind of way to sort of undermine your feminism. And I'm basically saying no, because it's all part of the fact that women should be making their own choices. If you want to look younger, get your fillers done, get some Botox, or the next thing I'm going to have done is get my teeth fixed. You know, or if you want to do those, that is your choice. Of course, that comes again, there's privilege, because all of those things cost money. So again, you know, it comes with all of those caveats that I'm very, very aware of. But at the same time, I also recognise that I'm a woman walking through this world.
Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining today. You've definitely inspired me, and I'm sure you'll inspire our viewers. So keep doing you. Thank you very much.
Oh, Jo, thank you so much. I love your podcast and I love you. And I think that this will give so many women leaders out there an opportunity just to take some space, think about what is important to them. And I'm glad you've put yourself out there to do it. It's so important. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Against the Tide, brought to you by Jo Metcalfe and Louise Kavanagh. We're grateful to the team at Sticks and Glass in Leeds and Bison Studios in London, our inspiring guests and wonderful listeners. Subscribe to Against the Tide wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.